this is Aromie here. Welcome back to our live Baxter DLC. We're here making a wedding cake with him. He didn't give that question room to rise. Hopefully, unlike your cake, Baxter set his supplies down and leaned over his phone, brows furrowed with a concerted effort. The tip of the pencil had yet to meet the page. Baxter hesitated as he drew his screen closer to double-check the shape before finally committing graphite to white. He slowly drew out the lower curve of the controller, stopping every so often and leaving darker lines at certain points. When he closed off the completed shape, it was completely lopsided. The first half looked quite good. The other half, however, was short and narrow. He'd brought it all in too soon.
Wow.
I wasn't expecting it to be perfect on my first try. He chuckled, running his fingers through his hair. Baxter started erasing his photo before sighing loudly. Give me up. Baxter simply turned the page over onto his other side. He sketched the controller again to no more success than the last. He set the pencil down. There was no attempt to erase anything. Baxter was already turning to the other half of the apartment. I'll get another sheet, or rather entire stack would be best. He stood up, digits resting against the nape of his neck. Baxter's eyes met yours. His tense smile faltered a bit as the bright brown of his irises flicked straight down to the ground. Do you want me to draw it instead? You good? You don't need to worry. I'm not quite as sensitive as I used to be about mistakes. I will survive this, pride as wounded as it may be from these trials and tribulations. His tone was joking and light, but you couldn't help finding it unfunny. The Baxter you'd known agonized over missteps, far more than the average person. In the last few days you spent with him, you'd seen he had grown as a person. You would have believed he could deal with it, even if he said nothing. I can get you a pencil and bring even more paper to share if you'd like to give it a try as well. Yeah, 2 heads are better than 1, so it wouldn't hurt trying. Why not? It sounded like it'd be fun. Now you aren't interested, he could do it. No, 2 heads are better than 1. Yeah, if you could, I'd appreciate it.
Certainly.
Baxter nodded, disappearing back to whence he came. Moments later, he returned through the hall with an inch-thick sack of paper, as he said he would, and with a second pencil in tow too. Resuming his Herculean task, Baxter took another sheet of paper off the top and hoped that the third time would be the charm. After taking another glance at the reference photo, he sketched out the general shape of the controller. Baxter peeked over his shoulder, outright dropping his pencil once he realized it was better than what he was doing even before it was done. Once you did finish, Baxter took it gratefully in hand.
You're good.
Thank you, Michiko. You saved me the burden of buying more paper this late in the evening, the night before a wedding I was supposed to be a planner for. He laughed, his tone softening as he said your name. It was a stencil. You hadn't taken the time for any particular details. Still, Baxter seemed so relieved. Luckily, that was less painful than I assumed. He didn't miss the marked sarcasm that snuck into his words despite his better efforts. We can prepare the colors. Perusing the counter for what remained of the supplies, he picked up the box of food coloring. It'd seen used before, judging by the inky smear left behind on Baxter's fingertips as he gathered the few of the bottles he needed every color, except for yellow. As they worked through them, he pried open their little tubs of frosting.
All right.
Nearly all of that will be red. Let's save some for white. Off-white, I suppose. Cream cheese can only look so pale, and a little extra for the black parts. I do believe mixing blue, green, and red produce black. After closing his text of the photos, he searched online for how to make black frosting. Yes, that appears to be the way. 2 little bowls were filled with several messy spoonfuls of frosting. The rest was plopped into a larger salad bowl, while Baxter couldn't help noting as ironic. Dye was added drop by drop, building up the shades as you went. The red bottle was squeezed nearly empty to reach a true red that matched the controller. Your white frosting was the only one that remained unblemished. What precious little red remained was reserved for the black, which ended up a dismal gray. A harsh thing to think about a color that was, well, somewhat somber in nature. Still, Baxter didn't want to push her dye any further at the risk of ruining its taste or consistency. Few people are likely to notice that the black is more of a... His words trailed into nothing, eyes half lit as he stared at the frosting with newfound recognition. His face turned to you, taut with an unspoken emotion. Baxter unthinkingly reached out to swipe a bit of leftover frosting stuck to your fingers, stopping himself before he did. What is going on? What's going on here? Alright, nothing. This will work fine for our purposes. He went to withdraw saran wrap? Did I say, what the fuck did I just say? From one of the kitchen drawers and proceeded to hastily wrap up the 3 bowls before finally putting them away in his fridge. With the frosting and stencil taken care of, the two of you busied yourself cleaning the counter and tossing their fused pieces of cardboard. A hollowed-out frosting tub and failed controller outlines. Baxter even got a chance to properly hang his jacket. The timer ran out as he continued with minor chores. He'd move on to cutting out the stencil using the same scissors Baxter set aside from his adventure in opening the cake mix box. Baxter handled with the cake. Oh, my laundry's done. I should get that when I wrap this up. A toothpick test was done and came out clean. It was time for your treat to chill inside the freezer until it was set enough to be decorated. Outside of that, everything that needed to be done had more or less been done. It was odd how familiar the empty space between a finished cake and an almost finished one felt. Then again, this had all happened before, hadn't it? You weren't left lingering in that quiet thought for long. Baxter had a plan for what to do next, of sorts. It amounted to pressing it against the fridge with his body almost perfectly parallel to it and staying that way. Before you could ask, he sighed deeply, as if the air he had stored in his body was being sucked out of him by the devious appliance he'd become attached to. Cannot believe I'm doing this again. You and me both. I can. Why wouldn't we, right? Gonna get another irresistible drink. He asked jokingly. Oh, irresponsible, not irresistible. I mean, depends on how you see it. What, are you implying you're not thrilled about this development? You tease. He sighed alongside. Not literally. There wasn't enough space for that fridge for that. The drink. Let's ease it. I wish I had a drink, but as you say, that'd be unprofessional. Unprofessional? Literally, is any of this professional at this point? This is after hours. Sir? It's after hours. We're friends now. This is not business here. I'm not getting paid. Well, I wouldn't be paid. Whatever. Baxter's eyes closed as he languished there in a relative silence. The veneer of him being a put-together wedding planner had been chipping since before you walked through his front door. It was entirely absent then. Who he actually was had been left exposed. You wanted to talk to him, the Baxter before you. Hey, Baxter. Why... I mean, I know why you're doing it, but why did you go to this much trouble? It's not healthy to push yourself this much. No one would have thought anything of it if you hadn't brought it up. Is it because you know the couple personally? Doing this last minute was terrible planning, I have to say. I'm gonna wait for him. There are particularly odd, extraneous circumstances. Even I can admit I wouldn't do this for every client. And somehow that makes this worse. It's painfully obvious I have some personal investment enough to merit this. He gestured vaguely to the kitchen, then to you. Are you doing it for me? It's not even my wedding. Can you imagine if it was my wedding? And he still had feelings for us? Oh, that'd be... Ooh. Also, that would be rude. That would be very wrong of me to be with my wedding planner the night before my wedding.
I swear.
More than I intended to be. More than I ought to have. His arm relaxed, falling uselessly to his side. Finally, Baxter pried himself off the appliance, though he didn't remove himself from it for long. Instead, his black hair tousled as he flipped around, so the back of his head was against it. His gaze shifted to the ceiling, suddenly fascinated by the next floor up. I wouldn't have done this if you weren't here. Baxter closed his eyes, sighing deeply as he continued. Even though Miranda was the client's sister. He said client in a way that made Jude sound clerical, that detached him from knowing him. Miranda or Scott as actual people. I wouldn't have offered. It'd be overreaching to do as much as I have. I've gone beyond the line of pure professionalism more than once already. The cake is the icing on top. Why did you do it then, if you're so worried? And what did it have to do with you? He wouldn't have helped if you weren't here. You hadn't asked him to. It'd be his idea in the first place. It's because he knew I was going to help him. Or if just finding a reason for a longer time with us. The question made him stop in his tracks. His confession came, uncharacteristically, without much thought on how it'd be received. Now he needed to explain himself. Well, naturally, it's against my better judgment to make anyone uncomfortable.
Of course.
In such a tight spot, Jude wouldn't have questioned any help he was offered. But what would Miranda have thought? And Terry as well, if some strange man they knew long ago was getting that personally involved in their situation? I wouldn't have crossed that line, no matter how much sympathy I had for Jude's position. Miranda and Terry had been your friends for years. You were certain Baxter was wrong about his assumption. Whether or not Baxter had prior experience with those two, there was no way they would judge him poorly for caring about someone, especially when it was for Jude and Scott. Baxter wasn't finished, however, and you weren't going to interrupt. So where did my confidence come from? Very simply, I thought you would understand. That I had good intentions. That the odd lengths I went to was merely how I am. That it was okay to let me be involved. And if you did understand, everyone else would as well. Oh. His answer felt like a rock into still water. He seemed smaller, younger now, like he was still 19.
Truthfully.
As soon as it comes to you, it appears my reason goes out the window, along with much of my dignity. He snorted derisively and didn't know where to look. The tiles above had lost their appeal. But that is how it is. I do understand, Baxter. I know you. I don't understand, Baxter. I don't know why you do this to yourself, to everyone. I want to understand you, but you make it hard. Glad you trust me. There are no words you could think of that wouldn't cheapen his feelings. I feel like being silent's pretty good. He settled and staring past the wall, past everything, his arms crossed over his chest. Baxter's fingers dug into the sleeves of his shirt, pinching and knitting the fabric with new creases. I think you need to properly apologize to me. His voice felt far away too, like he wasn't there in the same room with you anymore. It's odd, really. I'm the one who left. I hurt you. Okay, we're getting somewhere. And yeah, I haven't stopped seeing you as someone important to me, important in my life. Then why'd you forget about me? Or pretend to forget about me? Or whatever the fuck you did? It truly does seem as though everything I did was for no reason at all. Baxter gave you no time to process the emotions he'd stirred before he launched into a non-sequitur? I don't know. That sent you for a loop in an entirely different way. Michiko, do you know that I enjoy dyeing my hair? Oh. Well, maybe yes. Because why else would you do the black and white situation? For a second, you weren't sure that you heard right. Baxter had been painfully honest with you these last few seconds, only to prompt you on hair dye. I'm sure it's leading up to something. It convinced you he was doing the same thing that he always did, changing the topic when it became a little too real. When nothing further happened, you realized he was seriously waiting for an answer. You nodded in reply, pointing to his plain black hair. You remembered how it looked the day you met him on your street years ago. He smiled faintly as he idly ran a finger through the curve of his bangs. That was my most dramatic look. However, I started dyeing my hair when I was 14. I'm still dyeing. You are? Another little kernel of truth you hadn't been prepared for. That isn't your natural hair color.
No.
It is not. Then what is? Then what? He tore one of the longer strands of his hair around a finger. Gray. Gray? Your hair is gray? The generous might say I could count it as black, or that it was black in the right light, as my parents placidly put it.
Honestly.
The fact of the matter is that it's a dusty gray, quite similar to the frosting, actually. Oh my god. Let me see! Considering it had been a decade of dye jobs, you'd literally never seen his roots show. Baxter was more than dedicated. He took his shock in stride, completely anticipating it and carrying on the conversation with himself. Now, why would I do that? I said it myself earlier. Who would notice a color that wasn't exactly black? And why would they care, even if they did? Me. I noticed and it bothered me, so I dyed it. He pinched a fringe of his treacherous hair again before finally leaving it be, his hand finding its resting place on his upper arm. Was it something I wanted only for my own preference? Or was it because I believed if I saw it as an imperfection, then that meant everyone else did? Probably the latter. That was the crux of it. He doubted his actions and appearance because others could scrutinize them. But whether they actually would or not didn't matter. He projected self-invented insecurities on those around him. Baxter only seemed half aware that was what was happening. He couldn't fully believe those who cared about him did so without terms or conditions. His jaw tense with newfound frustration. Baxter was firmly rooted in this moment, stubbornly refusing to take his thoughts away from him. It startled you, in part because this was the first time he had ever opened up to you without prodding. And because at the end of everything, you were still the only one he trusted enough to tell it to.
Well...
I have always been like this, you know. Have you? I won't bore you with the details. No, I need the details. It's been 5 years. His voice was as delicate and heavy as glass. I'm sure I've already made you question you were remaining here enough as it was. In short, what I'm saying is that I'm a fraud in all regards. You can't take any of it seriously, including what color my hair is. He chuckled darkly, pushing himself off the refrigerator and busying himself with checking the cake in the freezer. As the tension reached a fever pitch, Baxter reached out to pluck the metaphorically thread and unwound it with a forced levity. No more than 10 minutes or so had passed since you'd put it inside, but it felt like hours had gone by.
I appreciate the understanding.
Your many attempts to give me credence are noted and appreciated, though. He shut the door again before announcing that he needed to check the oven again to make sure it was really off. Not that he doubted your ability to turn off an appliance, but for his own self-preservation. That time it was the classic Baxter, a change of topic when it got uncomfortable for him. He always did that. Baxter tore himself apart, shred by shred, exactly like he did that to that cake mix box earlier, all for just being who he was. Of course, he wasn't telling the truth when he told you he didn't do that anymore. That was another of his made-up stories he said for the amusement of the listener. You had some clarity for the first time in years. Baxter returned to your side eventually. His teasing smile softened as his gaze met your pensive stare. You're kind to listen to me complain. He reached out, lightly pressing his fingers to your arm. I need to complain more. My girl's being way too quiet. She needs to be like, hey, like, oh my god, Jeremy. Covering Jeremy up. Anyway, like, I need my girlie to be a little bit more, hey, you're self-sabotaging. I don't like that. And you can't you can't form my own opinions for me, sir. Alright? Explain why you didn't text me back 5 years. Clearly you still had my number. Clearly you didn't change your number. So like, what the fuck? But anyway, thank you guys for watching today's episode. Stay beautiful and I'll see you guys in the next one.